Oh no, Belgium sided with Austria. Now it's going to turn my leadership war into a two-front war. Well, except France is on my side, so I don't even have to put troops on the Belgian border. So I guess we'll just move up that timetable for German unification then, shall we? Hello, everyone, and this is an episode of Counterfactual Gaming. That's right, the game series where if a historical event has happened or it's a canonical event in a fictional setting, we don't do it. Before we get started with today's episode, I'd like to encourage everybody to click the like and subscribe button if you like what's going on here. And if you have any ideas for other counterfactual historical stuff you want to see in games or counterfactual fictional stuff you want to see in games, drop a comment in the comment section below and let me know what you think. Today we're going to be talking about the German colonial empire, and we're going to be doing it in the context of the video game Victoria 3. And for today's video, as part of our discussion of the German colonial empire, I'm going to first talk a little bit about the history of the German colonial empire, and then we're going to see how we can do things a little bit differently in Victoria 3. First, let's talk a little bit about the German colonial empire. Now, the German colonial empire is not as big or as famous as the French and British colonial empires, and it certainly wasn't as profitable or as interesting as the other two. While the British Empire was famous for being so large that the sun never set on it, and while the French colonial empire is famous for having large tracts of Africa under its control, the German colonial empire consisted of a number of smaller territories in Africa, and that was about it aside from a few islands in the Pacific and a part of New Guinea. And part of the reason it's also not as famous as those other colonial empires is because the German colonial empire was taken away from Germany at the end of World War One and partitioned out as a bunch of smaller pieces of land to other countries and as part of League of Nations mandates. So, unlike, say, the decolonization that Britain and France went through as the 20th century progressed, Germany never did any of that. The end of World War One, that's it. Boom, colonial empire gone and taken away. Interestingly, even when the Nazis came to power in the 1930s under Adolf Hitler, there wasn't a strong drive to recover the German colonial empire. There was some desire to, but Nazi ideology favored and I'm putting this in quotation marks, colonization policy over land in Eastern Europe and all the way to the Ural Mountains. Why have overseas possessions if you could just take land from other people, get rid of them, and then establish a piece of territory as a colony right next to where you started? All of this contributes to the impression that the German colonial empire isn't very important. And in fact, it's even the butt of jokes. My personal favorite joke about the German colonial empire is from Blackadder in the fourth series. When Blackadder is describing the conflict that leads to World War One, he points out that the German colonial empire is a fruit stand, while the British colonial empire spans a fourth of the globe. Part of the reason the German colonial empire was kind of small and unimportant is because Germany did not really begin undertaking a project of colonialism until after German unification. Yes, I know the historians in my audience are saying, but there were other ventures before that. And yes, you're right. But any significant effort really didn't start taking place until after German unification in 1871. And even then, Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor himself, was not a big fan of colonial ventures. During his career, he would spend a lot of time opposing colonial ventures, and it's understandable why. From Bismarck's position, Germany is in the middle of Europe, surrounded by potentially hostile powers. She has borders to defend, she has to maintain a large army, she has plenty of population and industry going on. There's not as much need to build a colonial empire to spend money building a colonial empire when, if diplomacy fails, Germany might find itself at war with both France and Russia. So it kind of makes sense. But there was a strong element in German politics and society. They did want a colonial empire, so at various points in his tenure as chancellor, Bismarck did move some money around to help start colonial ventures. Following 1884, Germany had a number of colonial possessions in Africa, including German East Africa, which had places like Rwanda, Tanzania in it, German South Africa, German Cameroon, German Togoland, and islands in Papua New Guinea. But while the colonial empire was being built in the 1880s, by 1889, Bismarck was considering getting rid of the colonial empire. There was even discussions of selling some of Germany's colonies because he just wasn't interested anymore. So when we talk about a German colonial empire, we're not talking about planting a flag and just instantly expanding out from it. It's in fits and starts, and the German colonial empire starts later than other colonial empires in Africa, and it's not exactly what you might call a consistent national priority or policy. But the German colonial empire isn't just a case of a weak, small colonial empire that's barely worth discussing. The German colonial empire also involves the unpleasantness of massacres and genocide. And I don't want to go into the full description of this, and I also don't want to show any pictures of this. But while Leopold's Free State of Congo is more famous for its horrible treatment of the indigenous peoples, the German colonial empire was also involved in a lot of unsavory, unpleasant practices. These repressions and genocides included uh, wars in 1904 and 1905 and all the way to 1907 against the indigenous peoples in their African colonies, not counting German participation in the Boxer Rebellion in 1901 and 1902. Because, yes, there was a tiny German presence in China as well, although we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. The German colonial empire also wasn't as economically important as Britain or France's empires. Now, I'm not saying that the German colonial empire had no profitability or no value. But when we think of colonial empires of the 19th century, we think in terms of look at all the wealth that Britain was extracting from its colonial empires, or what France was extracting from its colonial empire. And you look at the German colonial empire, and it's just not as economically important as these other colonial empires. It's closer to an also ran rather than a leading, shining example of European colonialism. All of this means for us today that if one were to play a video game that had the opportunity for 19th century colonialism, and if one were to play a German nation, then the historical thing to do would be to just have a couple little colonies everywhere else and focus most of your effort on Europe. So that's what we're not going to do. Instead, today we're going to create a German colonial empire in Victoria 3, and we're going to do so in such a way as to have the best colonial empire ever. We're not just going to have an economically profitable colonial empire or a large colonial empire. We are instead going to have a colonial empire that meets a couple of different criteria. First, our colonial empire has to have a standard of living that equals or exceeds the standard of living in Paris or London. Yes, that's right. We're going to have a German colonial empire that makes the French and the British blush with its prosperity. Second, we're going to have a colonial empire in three parts of the world where Germany historically had colonies: Africa, Pacific Islands, and Asia. Only in this case, we're going to have an actual sizable colonial empire, one that should rival Britain and France in terms of population density and geographic location and size. Third, we're going to have a non discriminatory German empire. We're not going to have official discrimination against anyone who lives in our colonies. We are going to incorporate all of the colonies into incorporated states so that they can eventually enjoy the same institutions and political freedoms as the mainland in Europe. And we are also not going to commit any genocides. And fourth, I want to complete all of these objectives before 1900. Because I figure anybody could probably develop a decent colonial empire and make it economically prosperous by 1936, which is the end date for Victoria 3. But I want to complete it before 1900, just to show the British and the French how good Germany can be in terms of building colonies. Now, in order to meet the timetable for this colonial empire and meet its profitability requirements, I'm going to have to move Germany along historically faster in a bunch of different ways. We're going to need to unify faster so that I have all of German capital concentrated together for more construction sectors. We're going to need to have a unified Germany, so I also have a good army and navy as well. But we're also going to need a well-developed continental Germany so that the colonial empire actually has something to do. There's no point in building a colonial empire in Victoria III if you don't have factories at home to consume the resources from the colonial empire. And the flip side of that, of course, is the people living in the colonial empire will be able to buy manufactured goods from my factories at home. Now, I know, hold on. Some players are saying, but wait a minute, you don't want to raise the cost of domestic goods by having a bunch of colonial people buying them all up. And I do understand what you're saying. But my goal here is to use a combination of supply and demand to push the German economy further and faster than it was historically, while also boosting the standard of living of everyone living in those colonies. I don't want really poor and oppressed people in Africa eking out a meager existence on dye plantations, barely able to supply the resources that Germany needs. What I instead want are colonial empire buildings, resource buildings, and plantations flooding Germany's market with low-cost inputs that lets German factories be more profitable, while at the same time the pops working on those plantations and resource buildings in the colonial empire have enough wages where they can buy those German products and create more of employment at home in Germany. In essence, I'm implementing a neo-mercantilistic policy common among some thinkers in the 17th and 18th century. You have a colonial empire to help drive up the wealth of your entire country because the people in the colonies buy the manufactured goods from home, and from the people at home are buying the raw materials from the colonies. I'm not suggesting this would work in real life or is even a good idea in real life. I'm suggesting that it's going to be the strategy I need in order to have a super awesome colonial empire for Germany in the video game Victoria 3. Now, I'm not going to go through all the little things I do in my counterfactual historical run as Germany with its colonial empire, because as anyone who plays Victoria 3 knows, Victoria 3 can take hours and hours and hours and hours. And hold on, let me look at my script for a second. How many times did I write the word hours? Oh my god, so many hours! What am I doing with my life? Oh, God. Anyway, my point is, it would take many hours to get through that, and nobody really needs to post that content on YouTube, least of all me. What I'm going to do instead is hit you with the high points. We're going to look at my first tentative steps to building a colonial empire as Prussia, go through German unification, and then go through the long, arduous process of building construction sectors and building so many dye plantations and sugar plantations and coal mines that you'll never see anything else in your brain again after you look at all of those icons. Get through all of that, and then we'll look at what the German colonial empire's situation is in 1900. Although, actually, spoiler alert, I'm going to do it in 1899 because I've achieved all my goals by then. And there's no reason to just keep running the game past that point. Now, I've moved the clock to 1837, and I've already started my initial foray into colonialism in Africa. I've built just enough of a Prussian navy at the beginning of the game in order to move troops to Africa, and I have initiated a diplomatic play against Dahomey right there in Africa. Now, the goal is to conquer that tiny little sliver of land and then use that as a springboard to annex a whole bunch of stuff around there. Now, I've chosen a time to do this when Britain is tied up fighting a war in China, so they're not going to be interested in blocking me here. And you can see from the diplomatic information on the right side of the screen that I've been improving relations with France in order to try and encourage them not to get involved. And in this case, I'm counting on the fact that I have a ridiculously strong army to cow them into submission. I don't actually want to fight them. I want to just walk in and take the place without firing a shot. And as you can see, they backed down. Now, this gives me just a tiny sliver of Africa. It's hardly worth owning at all. But this is going to be my start point for annexing a whole bunch of stuff in this part of Africa. Why did I choose this part of Africa? Well, it actually has a decent starting population, which is helpful. But there are also resources that I want around here. I can use plantation style agriculture to do a lot of things in this immediate area, and you can't see it right now, but from where I'm starting right here, once I do a little colonizing into the interior, there is a part of Africa where you can grow opium. And I intend to take that part of Africa and add it to my colonial empire because I do want a supply of opium for military reasons. I'm not actually trying to get my population high, but because of the way the game works, certain medical technologies for the army requires opium. So we're going to move in that direction as well. Now that I actually own a piece of land in Africa, once I get a port built and get some infrastructure in place, it will be time to move more aggressively against other countries in the area. I want to take that whole area over, which is what I start doing in August. I'm going to, again, make that move right here in Africa, do it early so that I can claim the land sooner, and also do it while Britain is otherwise occupied. Those familiar with Victoria 3's mechanics will know that I want to give myself plenty of time for infamy to decay, and so budgeting some of these conquests earlier in the game has other benefits. Furthermore, I now actually have a land connection to this, so I don't have to rely on questionable naval invasions anymore. I can just deploy an army to Africa and just walk into their territory. They won't be able to stand a chance. Now, some people have probably noticed that I'm working on passing colonial exploitation as a policy for my country. And this may seem incredibly contradictory with my goal of making a German colonial empire that is prosperous for the people who actually live in it. But I need to explain why colonial exploitation will actually be better for the people living there than if I ran colonial resettlement. Colonial exploitation, rather than actually hurting the people who live there with higher mortality rates or higher unrest, really just does two things. It increases the throughput of all non subsistence farm buildings, and it nerfs the income the subsistence farmers make. Now, I don't want subsistence farmers in my colonial empire, but I'll take a plus 10% throughput bonus on plantations, resource buildings, or factories. Now, that throughput bonus is going to go away once I incorporate those colonial states into real states in my country. But that's going to take 20, 21 years, so I'm going to use that throughput bonus to help get those colonies built up so that by the time they are fully incorporated, there won't be any subsistence farmers. Everyone's going to have a good job. We're going to have a thriving economy. There will actually be a little bit of literacy in them. Those colonies will be up and running and profitable, giving people nice wages and nice jobs by the time that special bonus from colonial exploitation goes away. Now let's zoom ahead to German unification. I make the move for leadership in 1842 as a part of my plan to unify Germany as soon as possible. Now, I don't want anyone distracted by that revolution indicator in the upper right-hand corner of the game. Don't worry about it. I've got some people who are really mad that I'm enacting secret police, but they're just going to have to deal with that because I want to have a secret police. Later on, that secret police is going to turn into guaranteed liberties, but I want a secret police right now. If you're paying attention, you'll also notice that in the intervening years since I started conquering colonies in Africa, I've managed to snag some of the German miners. I didn't have to make war on any of them. They all voluntarily joined. But Hanover and Saxony, both at the same time, are nice little boosts to Prussian power. Now, my plan for German unification involved trying to get Russia and France to join me against Austria. Britain is busy doing something else, so I figured this was the perfect time to make war against Austria. Now, my plan doesn't work at all because both Russia and Belgium decide to do some odd things. When Russia joins Austria's side, this is when I start to put my brown pants on. Despite leaning Austria's way, I didn't anticipate Russia actually joining. And while Russia's army is often large but kind of ineffectual, In 1842, I was thinking to myself that they might not be a pushover, but it turns out their army is ineffectual. And in fact, they make the Belgians look competent by comparison. Despite Belgium's utter stupidity, the Belgians perform better on a per man basis than the Russian army does. France is willing to join for just a favor, which actually surprised me. I thought I was going to have to offer them reparations or something else. And what you won't see in the video is that once the war is over, a year later, France calls its favor in for a trade agreement, which I wanted to give them in the first place. So, good job, France. I'll be more than happy to give you a favor so that you'll ask for something that I wanted to give you anyway. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. I know I call this counterfactual gaming, and I know I highlighted it in the preview, but I can't believe Belgium actually sided with Austria. I mean, let's just consider this situation for a second. France is on my side. Ottomans are on my side. Austria and Russia are allied together. They've got an Italian minor in their alliance. And yeah, okay, on paper, Austria looks like it's got a lot of battalions, but none of them can help Belgium. And Belgium's not getting anything out of this other than a favor from Austria. Now, a favor from Austria could be really powerful. Austria is a great power. They've got a big economy. They've got a big army. So I do understand in a certain calculus, oh, okay, getting a favor from Austria means that I might be able to get something better later on. But when you're already sandwiched between Prussia and France, and you have no land connection to any other allies, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for join the war as well. The only redeeming quality of this is, of course, that I unified Germany soon after the war ends, and you can't pay war reparations to a country that doesn't exist anymore. But this does highlight some of the issues with the AI under the current patch. Now that the war has started, my plan to defeat Austria is fairly simple. It's a leadership play, so I really need to kind of grab their capital. But because the Russians are involved in the war, I don't really want to spend months and months slogging through trench warfare on the front. So I'm going to instead use an amphibious attack on the soft underbelly of Austria to try and get them from behind. Since I've taken the time to actually invest in a Prussian navy, this is an option that I have. I leave the Belgians to the French. I'm just going to let the French army deal with that little problem. And I intended to screen the Russian front and focus more heavily on the Austrian front, but the Russian army doesn't do a very good job, and so I'm able to make gains against them when I even thought I wasn't going to be able to. This is probably due to the fact that they're trying to split their effort between me and the Ottoman Empire. Can we get an F in chat for Belgium? They will not be opposing me ever again. On the plus side, Austria did not defend its coasts very well and did not sortie its navy out to stop my stupid navy. And the Russians couldn't be bothered to protect Austria because they're involved in like some other stuff that's going on. And so we were able to invade through the soft underbelly via Venice and start marching towards Vienna. By January of 1844, the Austrians have finally had enough, and they do capitulate. Now, the Russians haven't gotten out of the war yet, but with the Austrians out of the war, the Russians aren't a big deal, and because the Ottomans can't be bothered to do any fighting of their own, I save the game here and then negotiate a separate peace with the Russians later, selling out Ottoman interests, because frankly, who needs them? Now, I wanted to move the clock to 1858 and show you the progress that I've been making in the German colonial empire. I've made some territorial gains, but you'll notice that the colonial empire doesn't have a lot of development so far. This is partially intentional on my fault because Germany itself needs some economic development. This isn't a problem with not wanting to develop the colonial empire so much as I need more stuff at home in order to make that development possible. You're going to notice that I'm still short of tools right now, and I've recently discovered electricity, and I'm slowly building up infrastructure and electricity in order to actually produce things that I need in Germany. The issues with tools are particularly vexing because there's just a never-ending demand for tools in the German market, and I wasn't playing optimally at this point, so you can see me fiddling around with my build queue to make more tools and to solve that problem. I'm also having issues with explosives, as you can tell, and I've got to get that sorted out because one of the purposes of the colonial empire will be to supply me iron and coal. It might seem odd that I need iron and coal in my colonies since I do control unified Germany, but you have to understand that by the time we get to the 1890s, domestic coal in continental Europe ain't going to cut it for my empire at all. And I've taken parts of Africa and parts of China will be taken that generate plenty of iron and coal. I've advanced the clock to 1876, and I've still been struggling to develop my African colonial empire as much. But you can see that I've developed resource buildings in it, and if you look closely, you're going to see some dye plantations that have been built, which I really need to supply my textile industry. I'm also facing a never ending problem with not having enough electricity and have to build more electrical plants in order to supply that electricity. In fact, all of those icons for not enough resources are basically lack of electricity for electricity using buildings because, well, I was an idiot and kind of overdid it in swapping PMs around. And so, even though I do want to build another 200 wheat farms in Shandong, I'm going to have to build more power plants before I can do that. And this issue with building in colonies versus building in Germany really showcases the strategic choices you have to make in Victoria 3. I know a lot of players like to talk about how easy the game is, but the easiness of the game doesn't really become apparent until you have a critical mass of construction points and construction sectors. Before you get to that critical mass, you have to make choices. You either have to develop one place or develop another place. You cannot develop them all at the same time. Yeah, when you've got 10,000 construction points, I can completely develop a state with 25 million people in about a year. But as we can see from this game, you're seeing that, oh, I have to develop more in Germany to support development in the colonies. And that means part of my colonies are getting sort of left behind in terms of development, even though literally this whole game has been about trying to create a profitable colonial empire. There's also the issue where if you overbuild the colonies while underbuilding at home, you don't have enough industry to draw in those resources and make actual use of them, meaning you just enclosed a bunch of land on subsistence farmers who now don't have jobs they can take that are better than subsistence farming because nobody's hiring on those dye plantations or opium plantations. When we advance the clock to the 1880s, you see that I've actually been making real strides in developing the colonial empire. I've got silk, tea, and grain coming from my Chinese portion of the empire, and I've also managed to draw a bunch of sulfur from there, which I need at home. I've also managed to get the most important part of my colonial empire, Eastern Mali. Why is Eastern Mali so important? Because Eastern Mali has the opium in Africa. It means I don't have to go conquer a bunch of crap in India in order to get the opium that I need for military use. Now, I don't actually care about whether civilians are using it, and you can see my opium prices aren't exactly cheap. But the point isn't to have enough opium to meet the intoxicant needs of my people. I can meet intoxicant needs through liquor if I need to, but I want that opium for military use. I don't care if it's expensive, I just want enough to supply my barracks buildings. Madagascar still isn't as well developed as I would like it to be, but we are making strides in Africa. I'm also tied up in a war with France's rebels for some reason, because at this point I'm still allied to the French, and a revolution broke out. The communists are trying to take over, so I decided to help them out since they were my friends and allies. Now we've advanced the clock to 1897, and let's take a look at what we can see in the German Empire. Have I managed to raise that standard of living up in my colonies versus what we're seeing at home? Now, for comparison, you can see Brandenburg is fairly well developed as my capital. I haven't lowered taxes arbitrarily to super low levels to make things look more impressive. So let's do a comparison. Paris is sitting at impoverished 14.0 standard of living. Britain is at 13.0 standard of living. In London, let's take a look around my colonial empire. Yeah, I'm in a little brushfire war with some indigenous peoples that I have not resolved here at this point. But you can see various places I have plenty of standard of living. I've got massive employment in my colonies. In fact, in some places, my colonies have a higher standard of living than Germany proper. This is because of how late game economics work, and I'm not going to get into all of that right now. As you can see, resource buildings are actually making me all kinds of money because continental Germany needs that stuff. But I've also got plenty of employment and money coming in on my plantations because I need the dye, I need the opium, and I'm also growing things like coffee because we need coffee. Now, if we move to the Pacific, we can see that I've made some strides in developing the Pacific as well, except in eastern New Guinea, where I seem to be competing with the Russians for control of that area. Although the Russians haven't done squat with their part of the territory. I need to do a little more development here because I just don't have enough standard of living. We'll get to that in just a second. You can tell I've been developing it, but there's an issue with lack of infrastructure and a lack of actual jobs to pull some of these peasants off of subsistence farming. So we're going to correct that little issue here, and we're going to take a look at China. China, I actually have significant numbers of pops still sitting in subsistence farming, but you'll notice that my standard of living is still higher than Paris and London. So I've almost reached my goal of having a high standard of living and profitability in my colonies, but Eastern New Guinea just hasn't reached that point. So I think it's time to advance the clock real fast and see if we can get that taken care of. And there we have it. I think that'll do. It's not the best standard of living, but it's certainly better than living in Paris or London. Yes, working on a dye plantation or rubber plantation in the German colonial empire gives you a far better standard of living than living in Paris and London. And there you have it. Certainly not the cleanest playthrough, but we certainly managed to create a German colonial empire that doesn't oppress people, doesn't do horrible things, and actually has a better standard of living than people living in London and Paris. Also, in addition to that counterfactual thing, we managed to have a bizarre war with Belgium, and we helped the French fight the French with the German army. And I don't know what's weirder, the German colonial empire in this game or German troops helping the French fight the other French. Whether you're a fan of gaming or a fan of theorizing counterfactuals, I hope that this video was a little bit of fun for you. Again, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of content. And next time, I promise to have slightly better audio balancing and audio pickup as my mic has been acting a little silly today. But I hope none of you are having technical difficulties, and I hope all of you have a pleasant day.